My next guest on today's episode of Masters Decoded Season 3 is Dr. Marcus Ranney. Dr. Marcus and I connected back in November on a topic which is very near and dear to me, which is all about biohacking. Dr. Marcus has been on a journey of bringing and driving efficiencies within the human body and really expanding what he calls the human edge. And he's in fact he's an author of a best-selling book called The Human Edge. And, he has some amazing and fascinating stories and perspectives to share about health, body, mind, sleep. And we cover all of these topics throughout this podcast. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. And if you have any feedback, do leave your comments and thoughts. And without much further ado, let me get on with the show today. Hi, Dr. Marcus. Welcome to Masters Decoded Podcast Season 3. Really glad to have you on the show.
Thank you very much, Anish. I've been looking forward to it since we met in Goa a few months ago. So thanks so much for having me here.
No, it's an absolute pleasure. I was pretty thrilled and I have been on a journey of biohacking, which we will definitely double click and triple click. And when you were on the stage talking about biohacking, I think our minds and hearts connected. And I said, you need to be on the show. And it's a topic which is very near and dear to me. We'll definitely go deeper into it as we move along. But there are many other things and many other facets as my team and we have done research about you, which I would like to know about. And I'm sure the guests would love to hear. But before we kind of go deeper into it, do you want to give a little bit background about what you are currently doing? I see a book of Human Edge just behind you right now. So you want to talk about the Human Edge, the book and the company and what you do currently?
Sure. So, I'll start by just saying I'm a student of science, and my first love, and hopefully always will be, is this incredible ability to dive deeper and deeper into understanding the human body. I'm fortunate that I can wear many hats and see how to optimize the body through its various aspects, whether it's health or performance. I wrote a book a few years ago called At the Human Edge. It's bestseller in India now. It's globally available. It's available on Audible as well. In fact, the second edition is going to be released in early of 2023 as well. And the premise of the book was really capturing all of the expeditions and extreme environment research that I was fortunate to do through my career, and really taking the reader on a journey inside of their own body through the landscape of extreme environments. What happens to you when you summit Mount Everest? What does your body go through when you run the 42 kilometers of a full marathon? What will happen to the human body when we send our first astronauts to Mars, etc., etc. So for me, it's something that I'd spent a good portion of my early career looking at extreme physiology, extreme medicine in various expeditions, which perhaps we'll go into in this conversation as well. So that's the book. And then on the back of it, I launched a company called Human Edge, which is a biohacking company working with individuals to optimize themselves to be their best version at home, at work, and at play. I'm sure we'll talk more about biohacking as well together through this.
Yeah. There are many rabbit holes which I want to explore today,
I
for
thought so.
sure. For sure. So I hope you have enough time. But I want to first say thanks. I know you're not keeping 100%. You are going through your personal ailments right now. Hopefully, you'll get better soon. Things will get better. But, let's talk about these extremism, which you spoke about, conquering the summit, running a 42 kilometers and why that thought of expanding the limits of a human body, and it's not just the body, the mind as well.
Absolutely. Look, I fell in love with it from a chemistry textbook. When I did my first degree, I trained at University College in London. When I did my first degree, at the same time, in parallel, I was serving as a volunteer reservist in the Royal Air Force. And those 4 years of service allowed me, because of my degree background and my scientific inclination, allowed me to do some very interesting field experiments in different parts of the world. I was very fortunate to be part of a team that went to Mount Everest in 2007. I was a medical officer for another expedition to the Arctic in 2008.
Wow.
And then some of the most fun I've had in my career was actually being invited to work at NASA as part of the medical crew for one of the space shuttle missions. Unfortunately, I was on the ground, but I still
Okay.
got to be the closest human being to the rocket at takeoff and landing, and then
Wow.
monitoring the astronauts when they were on the International Space Station as well. So through my career, whether it was that or climbing and summiting Mount Kilimanjaro last year, I've run many marathons. So I've always had this personal interest about how I can optimize my human frame, first from a scientific principles perspective, but then through the last, I'm going to date myself now, about 20, 25 years, increasingly involved with extreme athletes, endurance athletes, CEOs, business leaders, weekend warriors, folks like you and
Okay.
I who also enjoy doing these things, and slowly building that capability in science into a business. So that's been my journey, and I'm just so fortunate because the body is so incredibly complex, multidimensional, that science is just, I wouldn't say it was in catching up. I mean, science and technology is now beginning to have some role to play in helping us unlock the volume of data and information that resides inside of each one of us. And so I'm just very fortunate to be playing in the sandbox of some pioneering work around biohacking towards performance and longevity as well.
And you give a variety of experiences, whether it's doing the reaching the summit or running marathons or focusing on the space shuttle, the astronauts going into the space. Now, these are variety of experience, right? And each one of them require a certain level of fitness, whether it's physical and mental.
Yeah.
And you need to prepare. And there are enough shows on various OTT platforms which talk about the how astronauts prepare and how people who prepare, they still get chopped off at the nth hour, that they cannot make it, and they have to go through a lot of mental and physical training, which ensures that the best upkeep. Now, through that process, time and again, everything and everyone has said, and you've also serviced in the armed forces, everybody cannot make that cut.
Yeah.
Now, in your experience, and someone like me who have a lot of ailments, and is it really possible to stretch our limits for each one of us, right? Every human being do that
Yeah.
on planet Earth?
I think a long answer short is the answer is yes. I think we all have the ability to stretch. How far we can stretch that is the limitation of our biology. So we've always, or not always, we've often had this debate about nature versus nurture.
Yep.
And there is a huge amount of nurture which actually decides the success of the organism, irrespective of the genetic component that he or she may carry with them. Now, taking it to the human edge, that last 0.1%, which you're describing, whether it's an astronaut, a fighter pilot, a gold winning Olympian,
Yeah.
etc., that requires a degree of genetic composition which gives them that edge, in addition to a lifelong of training. Right? There was a fantastic phrase by a successful entrepreneur in India. I forget which one it was, but he said that overnight success are a lifetime in the making.
Yeah.
And it's entirely true. You look at anyone from Michael Phelps, who's spoken about it, the fact that every single day for those X number of 15, 16 years that
Yeah.
he participated in Olympians, he turned up at the swimming pool, irrespective of whether he was ill, sick, whatever it was, traveling, he swam every single day.
Yeah.
So discipline and hard work will take all of us to our extreme limits. That last piece to the human edge requires a little bit of genetic magic and mind over matter as well. But that's what I find fascinating, that we're not limited by our biology. We can all hack, we can all push, we can strain, we can stretch. And it's an incredible journey to get there.
You spoke about genetics and you also spoke about science, and today medicine allows us to stretch our limits and gives us a lot of information. And I often see parents today saying that, I want my child to be the next Sachin Tendulkar or be the next Michael Phelps. So is science evolved to that stage where they can identify the genetic composition of an individual and say, yes, that person can be the Michael Phelps or Sachin Tendulkar or XYZ sportsman?
It's a double-edged sword. So I'm a young dad. I've got two young kids. You may hear, and you definitely will hear them. You may see them at
Sure,
some point during this
definitely.
recording today. But it's something that we as young parents often think about. And I'm kind of happy and fortunate to think that science doesn't allow us to have that degree of control over people. And that's the beauty of serendipity of life, and us discovering where we want to go.
Yeah.
I think what we have been able to do since the Human Genome Project in early 2000s, and now a number of advancements since then, is identify some genes which have a direct role to play in health and performance. And they've been identified. So, for example, with Alzheimer's, we know it's the ApoE gene and specific variants of that.
Yep.
With certain types of breast cancer, we know there's BRCA1 and BRCA2, et cetera, et cetera. So we know there are some in disease. In the same way, we know there are some in performance as well. But the multi-nodal ability of an individual, whereby different genes, I don't want to say cross-react, but interact with one another in different ways when an individual is subjected to different environments, something we call epigenetic transcription, which is the expression of genes based on the inputs, either it's environments like food or temperature or exercise modality or training or equipment or mental capacity, etc. These alter the epigenetic transcription, the representation of those genes. And then in the right training environment with access to the right resources and equipment and frankly, accessibility and affordability, we then start to see shining players bubble up from that process. So I kind of like the idea that it's still something which is yes, there's a genetic lottery, but it's something that if we have the right amount of dedication, access, and affordability, then we can each have a Sachin Tendulkar or a Messi sitting in our homes today.
So, flipping the question in a different way, everybody, like you said, probably we do not have enough science to show and differentiate that 0.1%, which has that lottery, and you are part of that lottery, or your child or somebody in the family has won that lottery. But how is science evolved today enough that I can know what my 99.99% looks like from a limit? How much can my body, my mind stretch?
I wouldn't say 99.99. I would say that science allows us to create predictive models on individuals as to what he or she could potentially achieve, right? And I know there are lots of caveats in my statement. The predictive, because ultimately it's with no certainty that we can do anything in life. Models, because it's based on past experience and historic data, and it may not be truly representative of yourself. And potentially achieve, because as we've already described, that ability to stretch is in some degree of control to us. So with the right amount of discipline, accessibility, and affordability, we can potentially stretch that envelope further than the individual may have ever imagined themselves before. So this, I think, is the advantage, but also a disadvantage when it comes to genomic analysis. Genome sequencing and the interpretation of genomes is a probabilistic science, which should be read by an individual who's able to interpret that correctly, to use it for the individual to push him or her to that extreme with the right external environment, inputs, etc., etc. So I hope that sort of gives you and your listeners a little bit of a flavor for that.
No, it does, because there is always this myth, right? And I want to come out of this rabbit hole because I can keep asking questions because, and I definitely will come back to this topic. But and I've interestingly, when I speak about biohacking and when I speak about me tracking sleep, or with this band, or me tracking my blood glucose real time, people have asked me, or me, all of us wearing an Apple Watch or having an iPhone around us or any other phone, how much is technology really good around
each one of us. People have asked me this question, interestingly, in the last 6 months. You are surrounded by so many rays and gammas, and there have been so much of science which has said that these rays are harmful. What's your thought about that?
So my answer is simple. Technology is intrinsically never good or bad. It is up to human behavior to dictate whether it is used for the good or the bad. The same science involved in a nuclear explosion can also be used to power an entire city and an entire country, etc. It's the same science that we are using to manipulate genomic sequences through CRISPR-Cas9 to alleviate the disease
Yep.
burden in people with genetic challenges may one day potentially be used to create a superhuman race, which is hugely advantageous to the rest of society and create another form of class division within society, etc. So the science and the technology is not what is good or bad. It is how we as human beings decide to use it. What I love about the world that we live in today, and I just want to let the listeners know that it's probably the first time that the interviewer has got more technology on him or her than I do.
Okay.
So that's a testament to how mature and how much Anis enjoys biohacking. But what I love about the technology today is that it's opening our world to data. And as a clinician, as a physician, as a scientist, I always say that one can't treat what one can't measure. So by knowing your glucose variability to the day, what you respond to, what you don't respond to, how zone to exercise affects you, how poor sleep affects you, how high stress environments stress you, etc., can allow an individual like yourself to hack that, which a person without the patch may not even appreciate at all in
Yep.
terms of what that is. And in terms of scale, this is hugely scary, right? I think about 25 to 30% of all the C-suite and executives that I treat or coach have stage 1 fatty liver or pre-diabetes, so
Wow.
some form of metabolic syndrome. I do work with extreme athletes, cricketers, etc., and I see it quite often in that cohort as well. In fact, an IPL, one of the IPL teams did a research piece last year where they tested the blood of all of the cricketers, and they found that even in this young, fit cohort of human beings who are at the highest performance that they may probably achieve, 31% of them had pre-diabetes. So this issue about diabetes, metabolic disease, fatty liver disease, PCOS is massive and is exploding around us. So that's why these data devices, technologies are hugely important for us. So I think it can be used as a power for good. I think the role of individuals like myself and companies like Human Edge is how can we interpret the data in an intelligent manner to provide the end user with actionable insights and things that they can do to help improve themselves, right? So that's what we're doing as a company: consumption of data, intelligence and interpretation, and then creating a layer of biohacking that people can then implement in their own lives through easy technologies like mobile phones.
My third rabbit hole is going to be the Human Edge company, which you are focusing on right now. But I have a couple of more questions. In fact, my own near and dear ones, whether it's my wife, whether it's my own brother or my mom or everyone, when I talk to them about these devices I'm wearing and why am I doing it and the kind of data I'm tracking, they say too much of, like what you said, you can't measure, you can't manage what you can't measure. But the focus of too much of data can also scare you. Too much of insights can also scare you or take you away from things which, maybe you want to indulge in or you may want to. So what's your take on that?
Yeah. I agree. In fact, there is a medical terminology for it which escapes me now, and we see it a lot with the sleep tracking devices,
Yeah.
wherein people actually suffer from poor sleep because there's this anxiety circle that starts to develop about checking my data, I'm not getting enough sleep, being
Yes.
anxious about sleep, checking my data, not getting enough sleep, etc., etc. So that can happen. There are many stories of people who, whether they're using a CGM patch or an Apple Watch, are completely fearful and unable to understand the data which is being provided to them and interpret that in the wrong way. And a lot of my clinical colleagues get hugely frustrated because they get sent these screenshots of apps and expected to interpret what they mean when they've got no idea, understanding, or background in terms of what's going on with the patient as well. So I think there is a responsibility of technology platforms to ensure that information collected is managed, interpreted, and displayed and I often use the word empathetic manner. So designing for trust, it was one of the first TEDx talk that I ever gave about 5-6 years ago, which was this idea for digital platforms to imbibe the values of the doctor-patient relationship,
Yep.
which is a relationship built on trust between two human beings. And at the fulcrum of that trust is this idea of empathy, the doctor empathizing with the individual, and how much healing can actually happen just by the laying of hand of that doctor on the individual without there being any other medical therapies at all. So how do we as platforms and companies bring that value set in so that when you are interpreting or visualizing your data, you are being shown the things which are meaningful in a way that you can actually take action on and doesn't create this anxiety, fear, and misinterpretation, which can be more dangerous than having no data in the first place.
Yeah. Now, I want to actually talk about one of the examples, which is actually recorded in, which the listeners can go back and listen to. It's a conversation which I had with my good friend Mark Goldman. He's based out of US. He was in India because he wanted to show India to his wife, and he got detected with glioblastoma, brain cancer, and he's on he's at the terminal 4 stage, right, which is a non-recovery stage. And this is April 2021 where he got detected with that. I still remember that call very well in my mind, where he called me up from the hospital declaring that this is what he has got detected with, and he was completely broken down. And doctors gave him only 6 months based on the data they had. And you spoke about predictive models earlier based on the past data. It's almost been 18 to 19 months and he's still alive. He's still doing well. Yes, medicines and therapies have helped him to stretch, but today there is no definitive end timeline, which he was given earlier. And he's been able to stretch that limit, and continues to stretch that limit with his own willpower, with his own focus. But when I asked him, are you using any data? Because he was in data, he was an analytics professional. And today, when I ask him, he says, you know what, I'm not even looking at it. I'm not even discussing or letting it be in my mind that I am going through something like this. And that, is fascinating, how human body and mind can play together and can stretch the boundaries. And that's why this session is very apt for that session too, that how I know someone who's actually stretching his limit to its maximum. I don't know if you've seen things like that.
There's many examples. And firstly, I'm really happy to hear that he's been able to extend and enjoy himself through that process. I think I always tell people that life is an experiment of n equals 1. What works for me may, in many instances, never work for you.
Yeah.
One of the reasons that I was so passionate about setting up the platform was that for many years, I saw with huge frustration how people, especially in a world where we have echo chambers built on social media and content is now freely available and there's no real information asymmetry. In fact, it's quite often the other case, which is over inundated with information.
Yeah.
That we do not know what's right for us. The way caffeine, take the simple thing about no caffeine after 2 p.m., which is something that we see a lot on social media and something that I talk a lot about as well, because it's applicable at the population level. But there's a very simple saliva-based test that you can do through genome companies to know whether you're a fast or slow metabolizer of caffeine. And if you're a fast metabolizer of caffeine and the half-life of caffeine is no longer 4 to 6 hours, but it's like 90 minutes, then actually you can enjoy the benefits because caffeine is a performance-enhancing drug. And epidemiologically, we've seen across the world, there is a longevity benefit for drinking 1 to 2 cups of coffee. And potentially you can have that second cup of coffee later on in the day, maybe at 2, 3, 4 p.m. And it may not impact your sleep as greatly as if you are a slow metabolizer of caffeine, and it takes your body 9 to 12 hours to clear that half-life, in which case even having one cup of coffee could potentially impact your nighttime sleep. So that's a simple example of how something as simple as having a cup of chai or coffee can affect your performance, your productivity, your sleep, your recovery, your mood, and ultimately your health span and longevity as well. And it can be addressed by doing a simple spit into a pot or take a swab test, right? So
Yeah.
life is the experiment of n equals 1. And I think the more of us who can sit in an opportunity to understand our human body better, we will be able to make informed decisions at the right time, in the right context, for the right purpose, in order for us to enhance our health span and performance as well.
Yeah. I'll get into this rabbit hole because it's opened up a new one. The N is equal to 1. And this is
Right.
something which I often discuss with people in the gym where I go, and, everybody says, "Hey, what are you wearing?" Or what are you wearing these devices? And I often tell them, "Hey, what I'm doing may not work for you." And the same conversation or arguments I have with a lot of practitioners of who are there in the gym, who would say, "Hey, do this exercise, this will help," or "Do this diet, this will help." And we'll talk more about it. I don't want to get into this right now, and I did promise that we'll come to Human Edge. So I know that the book came out first and then the company started. uh, so let's talk about the book first. What got you to write that book about extremism in human life, and specifically stretching the human limits?
Best decisions I've ever made in life are thanks to my wife.
Okay.
So before we had our first child, Aiden, whilst I think we just became pregnant at the time, she and I were just talking, and I was telling her a few stories. And she's known, I mean, we started dating just after I finished the Everest expedition. So she had seen some aspects of my sort of expedition science
Okay.
life, but not as much as what I had done. So she just mentioned in passing that wouldn't it be really good just for you to document your stories?
Okay.
And perhaps one day our kids may read it. And that triggered a thought that I love science. And how amazing would it be for me to give my kids a gift to fall in love with science with the same passion that I love it, but through the words of their dad, through my stories. So I just started writing, and initially the audience was only for my two. Well, I didn't even know we were pregnant with the first one. We didn't even know we'd have a second one. But I just thought that I'm just going to write this as sort of a document to hand over to my kids one day. And I started writing and writing, and as that process started to become more and more mature and evolved, eventually I one day met a literary agent, and she convinced me that this was a great idea to bring into a book. So it was a journey which took me about 6 years. The book got published in January of 2021.
Okay.
So this is during the pandemic itself. And so it was 6 years in the making, and the entire premise was how can I use the backdrop of extreme environments, something that I've always loved, and highlight to people how their body changes. So each chapter has been written in a particular vehicular style where
Yep.
I put you, the reader, as a protagonist in the footsteps. Either you are climbing Mount Everest, and through that journey of seeing what happens, what is base camp like, what is camp 1 like, what is camp 2 like, etc., etc., and interweaving some stories of history and some of the great first ascents, etc., etc. Then taking you on a, here we are, the first one is come. Yes, you can.
That's the life we all have, right? In the virtual
that's
environment.
That's it.
Yeah.
So then taking you on a journey inside to showcase, well, what's happening to your body physically when you're at base camp versus when you're at camp 1, etc. It's the same way when you're running a marathon. I take you through the actual process of running a marathon, or going to space, or diving in the Mariana Trench, surviving in the Sahara, or trekking to the South Pole. So that was the vehicle, that was the intent. And I've just been so grateful for the support that this book has received. I think the timing of it was quite fortuitous because it was released in a time when all of us were intrinsically much more aware of our health.
Yep.
We had been living in lockdown for about a year, so most of us were missing the great outdoors and not being able to do incredible trips and spend time in nature. So this was a way of reliving some of those experiences as well. And then I was amazed at the support I got from people like Dr. Tedros, who's the Director General of the WHO, and he agreed to write the afterword, or John T. Rhodes, who we all have seen, or most of us have seen growing up as this incredible athlete, et cetera, et cetera. I got astronauts to write, we got cricketers, we got celebrities who are very fitness focused, etc. So it was a beautiful journey. And the nice thing about the content is it's very evergreen. The last chapter, as you were alluding to, focuses on mind over the body and how we can push our physical limits, but that extra edge comes in through the discipline of the mind and the ability of the mind to take control and manage pain and help you push your body. And then there's a little bit for the scientists and the geeks who want to know a thing or two about mitochondria, which is what I've been obsessed with for 25 years. So I'll put a little bit about the mitochondria in that book as well.
We'll come to mitochondria a little bit later.
Good.
Definitely.
I would love to do that. Yeah.
Because it's such a, and you introduced me to that topic, and I've been reading a lot. There is rapamycin also, and we'll talk about it. Many people don't know about it. In fact, I spoke to somebody who was a physician, and he looked with eyes blaring out, like, why am I having that conversation with it? And why am I talking about these pills? But nevertheless, we'll come to that topic separately. But what I know a little bit about you, there is something which happened which also made you write this book, where you personally stretched your own limits and you overcame certain things which you went through physically. You got hit by something, and that was there some linking to that as well, the book coming out?
Yeah. What you're alluding to was a health challenge that millions of us went through collectively over the last few years, which was the SARS-CoV-2 virus, COVID-19. When the pandemic began, I was working in corporate health. I was the regional head for a global digital health company working out of Asia, based in Mumbai. But like many clinicians the world over, I decided the right thing for me to do was to go and serve again as a frontline medic. So I live in Mumbai. I became a volunteer for the BMC, which is our city's corporate infrastructure. And I was deputed to work in slums as part of screening units that would literally go door to door and screen people for COVID.
Wow.
These are the days before we had proper testing. I mean, the RT-PCR was available in India, but there was a limit of, I think, 1,500 tests a day. I mean, we just didn't have the lab infrastructure. So one of my jobs was to clinically diagnose people, and we didn't even have any treatment in those days. It was all very much symptomatic relief. I spent many weeks working in some of the worst hit places of Bombay, probably the most purposeful work I will ever do in my career. And unfortunately, about 4 or 5 months into that, I then started to develop symptoms. And I've had COVID 3 times. The first time I had it, which was the original strain, was when I was really sick with it. I developed a multilobar pneumonia. I then unfortunately developed a neurological complication as it started to affect the skeletal muscle cells in my lower limbs, which meant that I lost pretty much all the strength and power, and I lost the ability to mobilize myself, particularly my right leg. Now, this was a very hard time for me because, as you may appreciate, and we've spoken about this as well, my identity and who I consider myself is very locked in terms of this physical ability to do things, climb mountains, run marathons, push the body to extreme limits. And here I was, bedbound, unable to even walk from my bedroom to the dining table to eat. I was mentally very depressed, etc. And I very specifically remember it was my birthday. My mom had baked a cake for me, and they had come home to see me. And she said, blow the candles out. And I was thinking, now, what do I wish for? I mean, life is pretty grim at the moment. And that's when the penny dropped. And I said, well, I've spoken about resiliency so often in my career,
Yeah.
and this idea of finding the silver lining in the dark cloud. So I told myself, Marcus, it's not often that a runner gets the opportunity to learn how to run again. So let's do this journey to, let's make it a thing, and have the intelligence of biohacking, and have spoken and done this for many people. Why can't I do it for myself? So September 10, which is my birthday, is the day that I started to turn things around. And 3-4 months later, on January the 19th, it would have been the anniversary of the full marathon. Of course, that year we didn't have the marathon in Mumbai because it was just before the big second wave.
Yes.
I ran a half marathon in a personal best time, and
Wow.
I remember crying at the end, and just being really proud of the ability to biohack myself. I'll help you there. So this was my journey, and then that became my mission, that I've biohacked myself. I've worked in the space of disease for a long time, and now how can I bring this ability to other people? And so the book was a vehicle to get that voice out. On the back of that, a number of corporates started to invite me to share my story. CEOs then asked me to help them on their journey of biohacking, etc. And slowly, very organically and serendipitously, it led to me becoming an entrepreneur.
So the company Human Edge, now I know it's developing an app. I've seen the app. Why an app, and why one more health app? Today, when I evaluate my own phone, I have 7 of them. And in fact, I deleted over the Christmas break at the end of the year, I deleted 5 of them. Because it just, you are building a tech clutter on your own devices. So why, and what is the difference of this app which you're building?
Let me first address the why the app.
Yeah.
I would have been very content continuing to build the boutique services business that the early days of Human Edge was shaping up to be. 30, 40, 50 different clients from around the world have signed up and asked me to speak and do things. And we were growing the team. We were generating revenue from day one. And that could have very well been a comfortable lifestyle practice for me to make my family happy in terms of monetary contribution. But my ambition of creating impact made me realize that there's only one of me. And when I say one of me, I don't just mean me. I mean that there are many other individual experts and coaches and consultants who are doing that, who are working with a set defined group of people. But eventually that caps out in terms of scale, number one. So point number two is that help me understand my information in a way that I can make an actionable insight around that. So what we've been working really hard at is, it's currently a rules engine, but over time it will become a machine learning layer, is absorbing all of the intelligence that we have in our entire faculty of Human Edge coaches. And these are world experts in different spheres who every day deal with hundreds of people at the performance limits, and building that intelligence into an application so that, let's say your resting heart rate deviates in a negative direction overnight. Apart from just telling you that this has happened, we then creating the right prompts for you, not only understand why it might have happened, but then telling you the potential biohacks that you can do to course correct it before it begins to explode or snowball into something more dangerous thereafter. So it's not just about presenting all the information in one consolidated dashboard. It's then triggering that information in a way that we can understand why this is happening, and then giving you the right insights and actions to make change in your life as well. And the third is that we believe as a company our vision is to really create a Siri for health or an Alexa for health. And
Okay.
using a very conversational interface over a period of time, becoming voice enabled as well, such that that empathy that I spoke about some time ago is integrated into a digital health app solution, so that it's not just a transaction, but you begin to have an experience and a conversational with this app interface as it gets to know you better and better over a period of time. And you begin to create and build a relationship through trust built on data via empathy to hopefully unlock your greatest performance as well. So that's what we're trying to do. It's a long journey, but we're making a start.
No, I'm sure the journey is going to be wonderful and it's going to be exciting. But as an entrepreneur and someone who's worked in a company, worked in a healthcare domain, and worked with individuals, have its own services business, and now is looking to be an entrepreneur, come up with the tech space. And there are other companies, there are the big people, or the big boys like the Apples and the Amazon, who are really pumping in millions and billions of dollars. uh, and there are others who've already made a mark in the space, right? Now you coming up with a new innovative way of looking, and with a very strong value proposition of the strong uh, app proposition which is out there. And
Yeah.
there are, when you look at the entire spectrum of technology providers, and specifically in the app space of healthcare or health tech, you have the big folks like Apple and Amazon, who are already spending a lot of money. And then there are other established players. What keeps you awake today to ensure that you not only differentiate, people see the value? What's that thing which is keeping you awake?
Um, Competition and what the big folks are doing actually doesn't keep me awake at all. What keeps me awake is ensuring that we're being true to the science. A lot of what we're trying to do as a company has actually never been done before.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds easy, or perhaps to our listeners here, they may not fully appreciate the complexity that arises when you try and integrate multiple devices into one platform
Yeah.
through the APIs. All of the different devices have different types of technologies to read the same biomarker. So heart rate variability, which is an indicator of stress, has got different methodologies, calculations, whether using Oura Ring, Whoop Band, Apple Watch, Fitbit, etc., etc. So there is a lot that we are having to do in terms of recognizing biomarkers, creating a prioritization, standardizing between, giving a scoring system, representation of that data, interpretation, etc., etc. That is what keeps me awake, because these are things that actually few, if not any, have actually tried to do before. I think given our passion for science and our focus on that aspect, if we're able to craft this into a beautiful product, then all the other stuff will be taken care of. We've
Okay.
been very fortunate as a services business over the last 2 years to have a very strong clientele base of corporates, B2B companies. We've got 54 partners in 14 countries. We've now
Wow.
run program interventions for almost 25,000 white collar workers through those relationships over the last few years. So we have a very strong relationship in market with customers already. And what we are now doing is we're taking that intelligence and that service capacity, building it into a product, and then putting it through the pipes that we already have in place. And I would love if we've got any listeners who are at Apple or at Google Health or at any of the large companies, and you want to have a conversation about potential areas of collaboration, I would love to have those chats with you as well.
Definitely, if there's anyone listening, I would highly recommend you all. And I can leave some of the your team connects so that they can reach out to your team
Super.
or reach out to you in the show notes. But you spoke about that there is a second version of the book coming out also soon. Now, why is that?
So there's a second edition coming
Second
out.
edition. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we were very excited that the first print run got completed. We're not making too many changes to the content because, as I mentioned earlier, the content is pretty evergreen.
Yep.
There are a few updates because the science itself has evolved slightly. So there'll be a few updates in there as well. And we're also planning a slightly more, I don't want to give too much away, but we're also planning a slightly more immersive interactive experience
Oh,
with the
wow.
book as well. So I think people are just going to have to watch this space to see how this all manifests over the coming year or so.
Yeah. Is biohacking advisable for everyone?
I think
All
once
age,
I,
all ages?
so what is biohacking? Perhaps we should start with the definition of that. And I appreciate that in some instances it has a negative connotation. The way I view it and the way Human Edge views it is that each of us has a machine given to us by nature, which is the human body. Like any machine, it has an operating system. And that operating system is based on biology, which is your physiology and your psychology. Like any operating system, there's a code and there's data, and we can use that code and data to influence the machine either for its benefit or for its detriment, right? That to me is biohacking. It is applying a set of short interventions to optimize the code and the operating system that we have running, which is our physiology and our psychology. So whether you're 2 years old or whether you're 99 years old, your physiology is undergoing change, and there are things that one can do in order to optimize it. There are people whom have been considered as pioneers of biohacking, and they would openly talk about whole body stem cell transplantation, installation of testosterone pellets in their gluteus muscles, in their bum, etc., etc. That, for me, is not the space that I principally operate in. For me, biohacking is around democratization of this intelligence. It are simple lifestyle interventions that any of us can do in our lives based on 5 key vectors that we have, which is sleep, fueling the body, movement and exercise, your environment, which is the people, places, and technologies that you're immersed in, and then finally your mood and emotions, right? We have a great degree of agency over these 5 things. And what we try to do is provide you with the right input at the right time for the right person across these 5 vectors so that you can biohack yourself. Now, saying that, going to rapamycin, there are, of course, many pharmaceutical products available on market. Some of them are scientifically tested, some of them are completely untested and unsafe. And maybe we'll get into some of those conversations as well. But when I talk about biohacking as a company, it is through lifestyle interventions that we have agency around, which are accessible and can be democratized for us all to live a healthier, happier life.
And we'll go to rapamycin soon because it's a nice segue to it on this biohacking topic. And you spoke about people injecting testosterones or stem cell transformations. And I've seen people, and I've met this individual who's actually built a device. I don't know if you know this individual. He's actually put a probe in behind his head, which connects to his brain. He was colorblind. And he has put a probe now, which actually protrudes out of your head. You feel like he's wearing a cap, and just the sound waves and the just the emission of that he can decipher color, or he can read color now. And it's called the Human Cyborg Program. And I have seen him speaking. But do you think that's the extremism which is happening also within the biohacking space, which people are undertaking now?
Let me take you back 100 years to the time of the Great War. And if we spoke about an individual being able to have a metal valve sitting in their heart, people would consider that as a form of extreme biohacking. If we spoke about people having a screw plate at the base of their skull after a road traffic accident, they would have considered that to be an extreme form of biohacking. So I think it's all an evolutionary journey. We as a species continue to redefine what is considered normal and abnormal, or rather where the limits of intervention can be. Do we foresee a world in which we have bionic organs? Yes, I think it's almost probable that this is going to happen. We are going to have a world where nutrition is pill-based, artificially grown, supplemented to meet all of our micronutrients, optimized because of poor soil, unavailability of water, etc., etc. So I think how that's why I wanted us to just define what biohacking meant for this conversation.
Yes.
But definitely the role that science and technology will play in shaping the human organism will continue to evolve for the entire evolution of our species. It's just that is part of our nature, that's part of our DNA, that's part of our curiosity that we continue to push ourselves to the
No,
extreme.
I still remember, at least in our age, or at least in our lifetime, we saw the first mobile phones coming out, which were
Yeah,
huge and bulky,
yeah,
and everybody was so against it. They were
yeah.
talking about how bad it was for health and everything. Yes, the initial devices were very emitting a lot of rays, but as science has evolved, today you cannot live without a phone. That's how it has come to. Uh, Switching gears and getting into the next rabbit hole, which is probably linked to this, is rapamycin and mitochondria and that conversation. For
Right.
the benefit of listeners, many people may not know, and you and I have had a detailed conversation offline about this. You want to share what this is all about, and you've written it in your book as well. Subtly, not too much. I've read the book, so you want to share your perspectives?
Yeah. So if any of the listeners have not heard about mitochondria, I suggest they sit up and listen now, because not only is it the cornerstone of human performance, I believe it's my thesis, and it's what I wrote about in the book as well. It will be the deciding, or one of the most important deciding aspects of for the way we manage disease and health in the decades to come. A lot of us may remember hearing this word in our high school biology days. Mitochondria is a tiny part of the cell which is responsible for the creation of energy. It is
Mm-hmm.
present in all cells except the human red blood cell. Now, the lineage of mitochondria is actually really, really interesting, because in human development, in fact, in the entire animal species, it has only developed itself once. And in the plant kingdom, it has most probably developed itself twice. And it manifests itself as chloroplasts, which
Wow.
convert carbon dioxide into energy in the animal kingdom.
Yeah.
So the mitochondria actually existed as an independent early bacteria form of life. And it is thought about 2 billion years ago in some ocean somewhere, most likely near some form of geothermal vent, where the temperature was just in that Goldilocks zone. A single cellular organism, a prokaryote with a single membrane bound around it, met this early bacteria cell and engulfed it, ate it up. And unlike all the other probably trillions, quadrillions of times that have happened before and since, instead of being eaten up and destroyed and consumed as fuel for that cell, something in that relationship realized a magical moment where the cell that did the eating discovered that this little bacteria organelle actually began to create something really interesting, which was energy. And since that point, that lineage, it has now spread itself into every mammalian, reptile, every single cell, as I said, except red blood cells in the animal kingdom. And it is primarily responsible for the energy creation in the cell. Why is this important? Well, if I'm a heart cell, if I'm a cardiac myocyte, my job is to beat, to contract, so that the whole heart can pump and propel blood. And if the energy production inside the cardiac myocyte isn't optimized and the cells start to not beat as effectively, you can appreciate why heart disease begins to develop. If I'm the beta cell of the pancreas and my job is to secrete insulin on the recognition of glucose, and I suddenly don't have the right energetics inside of my cell, and I'm not secreting enough insulin, well, that's the beginning of insulin resistance, and then potentially the formation of type 2 diabetes, etc. So the inability of a cell to create the right amount of energy at the right time, i.e. the mitochondria not being as effective as it should be, is the beginning for many diseases. And we've now recognized this across every major chronic disease: metabolic, cardiovascular, neuroendocrine, neurodegenerative, etc., etc. Which is why I said that I think that the ability of medicine to optimize and alter mitochondria will have a huge role to play in how health is managed and chronic disease is managed in many, many years to come. So that's a little bit about mitochondria, its lineage, its history, what it does. Now, it is hugely complex. Firstly, the mitochondria itself actually carries its own DNA. It's called mitochondrial DNA, called MT, small m, small t, capital D DNA. And it codes for 13 base pairs. So the rest of the nucleus inside of your cells has all the other chromosomes that you need to do everything else required. But the mitochondria still carries 13 genes for its own reproduction and the creation of the machinery, which I'll talk about, which is responsible for the creation of energy. What's fascinating about mitochondrial DNA is that it is only passed on from mother to child. So your mitochondrial DNA and my mitochondrial DNA, you've got from your mother, I've got from my mother. And she's got from her mother before her, and she's got from her mother before her.
Interesting.
So tracing this back through human history, we have been able to identify Eve, the first mother for the entire human species, which was thought to have originated somewhere in modern day Namibia, which is where the quote unquote biblical Garden of Eden is thought to have arisen. So all human beings come from one central ancestor, which is a maternal ancestor that we call Eve. And we've been able to know that because of the lineage of mitochondrial DNA across us, etc. Now, the DNA that the mitochondria codes for is very specific to a part of the internal architecture called the electron transport chain. And I'm mentioning the ETC because that's where rapamycin has a role to play as well. So mitochondria produce the energy currency, and the energy currency is called ATP, adenosine triphosphate. So it takes electrons and protons, it creates a gradient across the membrane that exists inside of it, and through the natural flow of protons. And I won't go too much detail.
I have a question on this. So the mitochondria produces these protons based on the energy or the ETC it attracts. But rapamycin being a common medicine, not a common medicine, you can't just buy it off the shelf. It's not an OTC product. It needs a prescription. So that ETC, is it common across human being, or does that also specializes, or is it different from my DNA to your DNA?
No, electrons. So mitochondria across species work in a very similar manner, and the generation of ATP is via the electron transport chain. So there are 4 protein subcomplexes that have each individual roles to play, primarily to create this gradient. And then as the protons flow back into the mitochondria in a membrane, ATP is generated, which kickstarts life in our cells and creates that energy.
So rapamycin, now, which is the ETC, right? Not the ATP. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Right.
Is it advisable?
So rapamycin, how it works on the cell is through mTOR, mammalian target of rapamycin. So there is a part of the cell signaling pathways, which influences a whole bunch of other cascades within the cell biochemistry, which is affected through certain stress states. That stress state of mitochondrial mammalian target of rapamycin, mTOR, can either be upregulated or downregulated. It's really interesting that intermittent fasting and exercise activate the same signaling pathway as drugs like rapamycin. And what this means is that one can get the same longevity benefit through restriction of calories and through exercise as you can through pharmaceutical products. And I always want to make sure we talk about that, because I know we're going to talk about some of the pharmaceutical products like metformin and rapamycin and sirtuins, etc. But even in the absence of pharmaceuticals, and what I'm hugely passionate about is that each of us can get the health benefit through simple things like restricting calories by 25 to 30% through techniques like intermittent fasting or fasting mimicking diets, etc., and through getting daily exercise, zone 2 and zone 5, for 30, 40, 50 minutes every single day. So we don't have to be able to afford drugs. we don't have to see our doctors. We can make simple lifestyle changes to get that benefit as well.
And just for the benefit of the listeners, we are discussing these drugs not to put you all on drugs. We are having this discussion, and I'm not a authorized or a certified physician. Dr. Marcus is, but every body is very different, and our only message is please do not indulge in these drugs without any proper consultation. And
Absolutely.
like you rightly said, there are alternative methods to activate your mitochondria, right?
Yeah.
Like through and I see that, and I personally see that. I'll just share a bit. I was having nerve pain in my right elbow and in my left knee. It was very strange, and it was the same pain which was happening on both places. And I was in bad pain. I couldn't even lift a bag, that bad it was. And my left knee pain would just activate when I was trying to sleep. Now, as soon as I've got back to exercising, because I had recently COVID and doctor had advised not to put exertion on my body, on my heart, and my lungs, but I've got back to exercising, I'm seeing that pain go away. So, it's definitely, you don't need medicines. I could have easily taken an antibiotic or a nerve pain reducer, but I didn't. I chose
Yeah.
not to, but I went back to exercising, and it has really helped me, and it continues to help me. It's reduced the pain. It's not gone away completely, but I can see that. So that's the advice for everyone. Please do not, drugs should not be the first source of any activation. But these drugs exist, right? And I want to stretch this topic a little bit before we get into the other one is when you should and when you shouldn't. You know, that's the question. And I've been asked, and in fact, I've had this conversation with somebody who was same naive like me, and we both were discussing about rapamycin, and they say, no, drugs are bad, right? Yes, all of us have that myth, and specifically allopathic drugs, homeopathic and all of that. I will not get into that topic, but anybody hears about allopathic drugs developed in a laboratory, everybody have a strong reasoning of why they should not. So what is your perspective of these drugs, right, which are human performance enhancers? I would use that word.
So I think I'm glad you gave that disclaimer up front, because everything that we're about to talk about now needs to be listened and had conversations with their medical practitioner. We're not suggesting anyone starts anything. I think with that same intent, I will add that all of the molecules that we potentially talk about are still undergoing huge experiments. I mean, in the case of rapamycin, there have barely been a handful of human-based experiments. Right now, the person whom I consider as the global thought leader in this space is Professor Matt Kaebelin, who is doing the experimentation of rapamycin in dogs and pet companion animals as a surrogate to human beings, just because that is the closest organism that is residing in the environment that we as human beings are. They quite often eat the same food, they could breathe the same air, they're surrounded by the same technology, same stress factors, etc., etc. So Matt's doing a lot of work looking at rapamycin in dog studies, and some of that translational work will naturally go into human beings. There have been some studies which have been published late last year looking at the role of rapamycin in women for the benefit of reproductive health. And I think one of the first usage of rapamycin, and by the way, just so everyone knows, rapamycin is not a new drug. It's been on market for many years because sirolimus, which is the brand name for it, is actually used as an immunotherapy for people with kidney transplants, because it suppresses the immune system. Right. So we know how rapamycin or sirolimus works. It's been used for very specific indications. But I think the use of rapamycin in the longevity or in the health enhancement space will probably, one of the first use cases will actually be for women who are subfertile or approaching that stage of life where they want to keep their ovarian age longer, healthier for longer. And rapamycin has been shown to have some early benefits in that space. Also, periodontal disease, people suffering from gum disease, etc. Rapamycin seems to have a role to play in maintaining gum health. So there are some specific use cases, but what Anish and I are going to talk about now is the role of rapamycin for longevity in
Yep.
extending health, extending lifespan, and extending health span. So how rapamycin is thought to work is through the activation of the mammalian target of rapamycin, mTOR. As I said there, mTOR has, mitochondria has 4 complexes, but mTOR has 2 main complexes, complexes 1 and complexes 2. And both of those get influenced by different drugs in different ways. So if I remember rightly, rapamycin is meant to activate mTOR complex 2, but that might be wrong actually. But it's through that effect, i.e., giving a hormetic stress to
Yep.
the cell, that the cell begins to undergo a series of changes within its own biochemistry, which is telling it that something bad is happening to me now, i.e., I'm stressed or I'm starved or I'm in this incredible exercise mode, and I need to fix things very quickly to survive longer.
Yep.
And so rapamycin sort of mimics that natural effect that we have. Now, people on social media have been talking about the dosage, the timing, and there are honestly many, many different permutations and combinations. And what that basically means is we frankly don't know. We don't know what the optimal dosage, we don't know how often it should be prescribed, we don't know how long you should take it, we don't know what age you should start doing it, etc. Anecdotally, almost every single physician or person that I know in the longevity space consumes rapamycin, but they will do it at a different dosage for a different period of time, for different frequency, at a different stage, etc., etc. Have I been on rapamycin? Yes. What have I individually noticed with rapamycin? I have noticed that my body's ability to recover, most likely from a reduction in inflammation, is much hastened. So when I get to big race days, if I'm training for a half Ironman event, if I'm training for a full marathon, etc., I have anecdotally, now this is N equals 1 again, I will always say life is an experiment of N equals 1. I have noticed in myself that my body's ability to recover is marginally improved. I've also, through my conversations with many experts, like Matt Gabelin, like Brad Hadfield, etc., who are doing these experiments in humans and companion animals, have seen that there seems to be something about rapamycin, because if you take 1 billion years of evolution, rapamycin has life extension benefits in C. elegans worms, in Drosophila flies, in mice, in primates, and hopefully soon to be documented in dogs as well. So that represents over 1 billion years of human evolution. Wow. If rapamycin has a benefit in all of those different species, why would it not have a benefit in human beings as well? Right? So that is the underlying hypothesis which is making rapamycin such a well-researched and focused molecule in the health space as well.
Yeah.
Anything else we should talk about? I'm also being a little bit sensitive to make sure we're not promoting it too much for people.
No, and I definitely, if it was a different conversation, different setup, I would have gone deeper into it because I'm pretty fascinated with it. I'm thinking of trying it out. I would use that word, and gets into that my other rabbit hole, which is the N is equal to 1, which you've been speaking about. And this is my biggest peeve point in the industry right now with, sorry if I will be taking profession names here, which is dietitians, general physicians who say, they prescribe a certain diet without getting into the details of the individuals, or people who claim to be dietitians or experts in health have not analyzed their own bodies or looked at the person whom they're prescribing certain things, have not analyzed their body. And when I say analyze their body, not just their outside physical health, but the internal biomarkers. And the other piece is also, which is this N is equal to 1, which is the self-experimentation piece. And I've been on it for the last 9 months to 1 year of experimenting things in different way, whether it's around sleep, health, mind, physical strength, the energy levels, all of that. Now, uh, you know, is this okay today in the industry to one is to experiment and first, more importantly, for everyone to understand what their body is and isn't before they go and just subscribe to things which, like these diets, keto diet, vegan diet, the military diet, all of these diets which exist, right? And I've been a victim to it. I've done all of those. So I want to get your perspective on that.
Yeah, I'll use the example of intermittent fasting. And I say that because a lot of people in the last few years have jumped on this bandwagon, primarily because it's been spoken about so much in social media about intermittent fasting, and they've just started to do it. And they then come complaining that, oh, I've got terrible migraines, I've got terrible acidity, my energy levels are really low, I'm not able to exercise, I'm not able to think, etc., etc. So let's just spend a moment and talk about intermittent fasting, because I think it's something that a lot of your listeners have probably tried or have been exposed to. So intermittent fasting is just a technique. It is a technique in reducing the amount of calories that the body consumes in a given day. And we know scientifically, and this was well published in a Nature review, actually by Matt Giblin late last year, that restriction of, and this was actually one of the things that I presented at the conference that we met. Rule number
Yep.
one of my longevity manifesto is restricting calories by 25 to 30%, particularly if you're on the standard American diet or you've got a pre-metabolic or metabolic syndrome of some form. So we know that the single best thing that each of us can do every day to extend our health span is restricting calories. Now, one can restrict calories through a variety of different mechanisms. For you, Anis, you may find that intermittent fasting is the most effective way of doing it. I may find that fasting mimicking diets, what Walter Longo talks a lot about, is the best technique. A third person may decide that it might be through an OMAD diet, one meal a day. It might be through keto, paleo, military, etc., right? So how we arrive at the restriction of calories is basically down to our physiology and our psychology. So I always start by asking a person, what's your intent? Is your intent to lose weight? Is your intent to reduce subcutaneous fat? Is your intent to be metabolically more flexible? Is your intent to have autophagy or stem cell rejuvenation?
Yep.
Etc., etc. And based on that intent, we then sit and devise a program to help you get there. Because a one size fits all will never work. And in the same way that your early days of trying something like IF may include migraines, may include hyperacidity, may include gut disturbances, etc., etc. We need to be able to manage that individual through that journey so that we are ensuring that they are set up and optimized for success, because we will all have turbulence before we reach that cruising altitude. And that's why I think your point is so well emphasized, which is that just consuming information on social media, it could be the best dietitian in the world, and many of them are my friends and colleagues, and I work with them. But we still have to ensure that the biology of the individual is front and center, and therefore N equals 1 remains my framework of design.
And as part of this journey, I've been through it. Your body goes through a series of shocks when you change something. If you've, and specifically, people don't realize that. And that's where they quickly give up, saying that this is not working for me, because they don't realize that the body is having a state of shock. That, hey, my body has been accustomed to not exercising, as an example, or not fasting, and suddenly I'm being asked to fast. It suddenly goes into that state of shock. So these state of shocks, and because you consult with a lot of CEOs and CXOs, how do you coach them not to get away from that plan and stay course on that plan specifically?
We've become too comfortable being comfortable. That's our biggest challenge in life, and it's one of the reasons why we are all sick. We are living in a temperature-controlled environment through 2 feet of stone, rock, cement, and steel, air-conditioned, water-purified, no access to soil, little access to nature, no hunting, no fishing, no temperature dysregulation, etc. Our bodies did not evolve to live in this controlled environment space. And it's why we see this massive explosion of autoimmune conditions, the atrophic triad, the metabolic dyssyndromes, cardiovascular dissonance, etc., etc. So the more comfortable we get with being uncomfortable, and it's one of the first things that I teach any of my athletes, CEOs, executives, the more comfortable you get at becoming uncomfortable, the more likely you are to achieve that high level of performance. Because if you sweat, cry, and bleed in training, and I tell myself this every time I go on a training run, you will laugh and enjoy the game day, right? Because that's how much effort and discipline and hard work you've put in. So that's why cold showers and cold water immersion works. It's why sauna and steam room therapy works. It's why intermittent fasting and going some period of time without eating and calorie works. It's why exercise and sweating and resistance training, etc. works. It's because the body was designed to stress and strain. And in the book, in the chapter on sending human beings to Mars, I use the example of muscle atrophy and bone atrophy. And again, it's something that I spoke a little bit about the conference that we were at, which is that human beings, after the age of 40, we lose about 1 to 3% of muscle mass per decade. And as we approach the age of 70, it starts to become 1 to 3% per year. And astronauts see that 1 to 3% per month. Why? Wow. Because there's no gravitational component. You're free falling in space. Even if you're on the International Space Station, you're effectively free falling around the Earth through centripetal force. So you're in a weightless environment. And your bones have evolved to grow under the constant stress and load, which is manifested through gravity. There are tiny circular fluid compartments inside your bone, which as you move every single day, every time you walk, the strain effect is constantly undergoing differential strain. And that acts as a stimulus for new bone creation and old bone resorption. It's the same with muscle. It's why progressive overloading when you're doing resistance is the only way for you to get strength training and hypertrophy. If you lift the same 1 kilo weight every single day, after day 4 or day 5, you're getting no net benefit at all. In fact, by day 7 or day 8, you're actually getting a negative effect on your muscle. So our bodies have to be pushed, they have to be stretched, and it's through that pushing and stretching that we get the benefit and gain. And that's why all of these discomforts are so valuable and so important for our lives.
Sure. So you spoke about something in this conversation and you mentioned zone 2 and zone 5. Mm-hmm. And candidly, I was not aware before you said this in the conference, which we met 3 months ago. And I've been monitoring that. And I'll share my own experience. If I'm on an elliptical and for first 15 minutes, 16 minutes, I'm still in zone 1. And then suddenly zone 2 activates. And that's when my fatigue sets in, right? Now that's my body. And you did mention that to be in zone 2, you have to be at least there for 25, 30 minutes. Now I'm already there for 15, 17 minutes. And then I see zone, like it happened today. Now I remembered what you said. So I stretched till 25 minutes, right? So I could at least get that 8 to 10 minutes of me being in zone 2. There was a stage where it was going to zone 3. Now, I'm sure the people on the phone will be saying these two are just geeking out on these medical and these, but you want to explain what zone 2 and zone 5 is? And, just for my own case study or for my own benefit, have you seen that, right? Like what's happening to me?
Yeah. So exercise is painted with a very broad brush, and exercise is actually a variety. And I prefer to talk about the terminology of movement rather than exercise, because there are 5 forms of movement. There's aerobic, there's anaerobic, there's strength training, there's flexibility, and then there's balance. Mm-hmm. And all of us require all 5 components for us to achieve our health span and longevity goals. Particularly as we get older, those last 2, actually the last 3, strength training, flexibility, and balance, actually become much more important than the aerobic and the anaerobic component part of the equation. So how do we quantify exercise? There are some different methods. There's calories. A lot of people are familiar with calories burnt. Yep. But calories burnt is actually quite inaccurate science. A, because of the devices, and B, what is a calorie? Calorie is the energy required to raise a set unit of water by 1 degree. And is that calorie coming in the form of protein? Is it coming in the form of carbohydrate? Is it coming in the form of fat? right? We are more interested when we do exercise, particularly at getting the aerobic benefit, but also doing a little bit of fat burning through the process as well. So we want to make sure that that calorie is actually being burned from fat. So in order for us to become a little smarter about quantifying exercise, the nicest technique that I've seen, there are two, something called METs, but I think we'll leave METs for today's conversation. But the other one is called the zone framework. So it breaks exercise into 5 zones. And those zones are calculated. It's actually meant to be calculated by your blood lactate measurement. So zone 1 is the amount of blood lactate that you and I are producing right now at rest, having a simple conversation. Less than 1.1 millimoles per liter. Zone 2 is the amount of lactate that you will secrete if you're doing a conversationally relaxed running pace. So let's imagine that you and I are jogging, and you and I will have different paces, by the way. So I could probably, being a more disciplined long distance runner, I can run at a pace of about 8 to 9 kilometers per hour and maintain a very happy conversation with my running partner without breaking a sweat or without feeling out of breath.
I'll be way behind you. I run today at 3.5. Right.
Right. So our zone 2 there is already fundamentally different. So what that means is that my body's ability to burn oxygen, create energy, and exercise is at a fundamentally different level to yours. So obviously now us prinking ourselves with blood every few minutes is something not enjoyable. So a heart rate calculation was developed in order for each of us to understand what the zones mean. So to make it easy for our listeners, I'll give the calculation. So your theoretical maximum heart rate is 220 minus your age, right? So if you're 40 years old, any listeners who are 40 years old, your theoretical maximum is 220 minus 40, which is 180. For you to be in a zone 2 band of exercise, which is a critically important band from an aerobic perspective, and also because this is the zone where fat is the principal source of fuel, you need to be exercising in zone 2, which is a heart rate between 60 to 75% of your maximum heart rate. So anyone can do the calculation for themselves. And some of the devices now, like the one you have, I use the Apple Watch for measuring mine, but all the devices can do it. And if they can't, you can just simply do the math in your head, know what your heart rate band should be, and then try and maintain yourself in that zone. So all of us should get at least 25. I actually like to get at least 45 minutes of zone 2 exercise 5 to 6 times a week. Wow. Why this is important is because number one, it's important for your aerobic capacity. Number two, it is important because you're burning fat through the process as well. And number three is that when you are in zone 2, your brain starts to secrete something called BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which is a very, very powerful neurotransmitter which encourages healthy brain cell development. So it actually makes you smarter. It makes you more focused. It increases your concentration. It improves your memory, and it increases the amount of synaptic connections, which is the number of connections between different neurons as well. So zone 2 exercise is a critical component of longevity. And I think it was my rule number 2 in my longevity manifesto, if I'm not mistaken. And then in addition to getting 4 to 5 episodes of zone 2 every week, you should get at least once, if not twice, zone 5. So zone 5 is when you're operating as close to 90% plus of your maximal heart rate. I'll give a caveat. If you suffer from a cardiovascular condition, please consult with your doctor before you do this. But otherwise, pushing yourself to 90% of your theoretical heart rate shouldn't be a problem at all. And the reason why this is beneficial is because within your mitochondria, this activates a different fuel pathway. It's carbohydrate, glucose to glycolysis, glycolysis to pyruvate, pyruvate to lactate, which is the fuel mechanism involved in zone 5. Whereas in zone 2, it's primarily the beta oxidation of fat and free fatty acids and branched-chain fatty acids. So zone 2 uses one fuel pathway and zone 5 uses another fuel pathway, both of which are really beneficial to your mitochondria and your longevity as well.
No, thank you for clarifying that and for sharing that. I've definitely tried to now, not definitely getting more into zone 5, but trying to see how I can at least get zone 2 done 3 or 4 times in a week,
Yeah,
slowly and gradually as I embark on this journey.
yeah.
Uh, you spoke a lot about running in this entire conversation. And there have been enough conversations about how marathons runners prepare. So we'll not get into that. But there's one thing which you've done interestingly fun is you also have a Guinness record, correct me if I'm wrong, of running backwards,
Yes.
not running forwards. How did that come about? Like running backwards and setting up a Guinness record for that?
So I like to experience different things from a physical perspective. And about 5 years ago, actually 6 years ago, 5.5 and a half, 6 years ago, one random day on Facebook, someone sent me a message saying, "Are you interested in a Guinness record? Are you a runner?" I was like, "Yes
Okay.
and yes." So all he said was, "Turn up at 4:30 in Powai, which is in Bombay, where you and I live. Turn up at Hiranandani Gardens at 4:30 in the morning, and you'll find out more." And that's all I knew.
Okay.
And so I managed to convince Raina, my wife, that we should do this. This is going to be a lot of fun. And she's like, "It's another harebrained scheme. You're roping me in." I said, "Yes, but just come." So she came. Our son Aiden was barely 10, 11 months old, perhaps something like that. So we had to bundle him in and we took him with us as well. And we drove out, and it turns out that it was a Guinness record for the largest number of people to race one another running backwards.
Wow.
It was a record which was previously held by the city of Munich in Germany, and so Bombay was hoping to break that record. And the record was as follows: the distance was around 750 meters, which
Wow.
is a pretty long distance
Oh,
to run
yes.
backwards. Yeah, we had to do it twice successfully in 3 attempts within 30 minutes. So that's what Guinness stipulates. And so all of us, we were 1,450 people. We all stood at the start line. There were cameras all over the place. It was pretty cool. But I had my son with me, Aiden. And so the first attempt, I actually ran backwards, pulling his pram with me in this. We couldn't leave him anywhere, right? So I was
Yeah.
pulling his pram with me. And so it was absolutely hilarious. Eventually we all failed the first attempt because some people began to turn around, and you're not allowed to do that. Everyone has to be facing backwards while running. So luckily we managed to do it successfully on attempt 2 and attempt 3. So we got the record. But apart from the quirkiness of all of this, what I'm most proud of is that Aiden, at the age of 9 or 10 months, officially got a Guinness record for running backwards, even though technically he could barely walk. I mean, he was in the pram and I pulled him backwards. But it made it to the Sunday midday paper, and it was a very, very fun moment for us as a family. Yeah.
I'm sure he'll be flaunting it in front of his friends and
I think he'll be embarrassed first. No, Dad, that's just another thing you've done.
yeah. So on that note, you've been stretching your body, you're stretching your body limits. Like, what's the next big thing you want to achieve?
Yeah, well, it's already booked. My wife and I, we are going to the Arctic at the end of March.
Oh, wow.
We will be accompanying a group of CEOs from the United Kingdom on an expedition to the Arctic Circle, where I'll be running a couple of sessions, as the whole theme of the expedition is around mental resiliency in an extreme environment. We're raising money for a British charity, which is doing some incredible work with young adolescents who are suffering from mental health challenges.
Wow.
So I was very, very excited to be part of the expedition, and Rainer is going to be joining me as well. We're going to be spending totally about 2 weeks in the region, which will include us being fully self-sufficient, carrying everything on our backpacks and with a little sled behind us. It's going to be about minus 30 degrees Celsius. If we're lucky, we'll get to see the northern stars above us. It's going to be dark because it's still the winter months in the
Yes.
northern hemisphere. And I'm going to have my hip flask with me because it's always been a dream of mine to crack open a small, have a small glass of bourbon with some ice picked from the glacier under the northern lights. And
Nice.
it's our 10th year anniversary, and it's my 40th birthday as well. So I'm really excited that this is something that she and I can do together.
No, I know you are super busy, Marcus, and I don't want to hold you up. And I've been gracious enough, you've been gracious enough to hold on for such a long conversation. So thank you for taking time out. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you on the show. And I'm sure the listeners would be excited, puzzled, I would use also the word, because I'm sure a lot of new things we have discussed, and especially it's still not in, like I've teased people with various topics which we have spoken today across different continents, and they still say, what are you saying? Like basic difference of REM and non-REM sleep, like many people still don't know. And I have teased them, but no, thank you. Hopefully people will be a little bit more educated about their health and body and mind, and hope they get to learn something new from this conversation.
Yeah. No, thank you. I mean, look, you're an inspiration, because not only are you someone who is so interested in the space, and that's why we bonded almost immediately that moment we met. But I love seeing people on their own journey of transformation, health,
Yeah.
performance, and longevity. And you've been doing that incredibly well. I'm excited to continue that journey with you. I hope your listeners get great value from this conversation, and be very happy to connect with them if they want. I'm very active on social media, so happy to connect with folks as well.
No, I've subscribed to your LinkedIn newsletter and I love reading them because it's a little different than the other LinkedIn newsletters which keep coming in.
Thank you. Thank you. Great. Well, thank you for having me today. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. And I know your son must have just entered. It's 4 o'clock.
He did. He just walked in.
Okay. So thank
All right.
you. We'll share things with the team when it is ready so that they can use to market as well once it comes
Fabulous.
live.
Fabulous.
All right.
And we're going to
Take-
catch up in person soon. I want to show you the beta
Okay.
and talk to you and get your advice and wisdom on some of our sales stuff that we're doing as well.
Okay. Look forward to it. Let me
All
know
right.
when.
I'll see you soon. Okay.
Take
Take
care.
care.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.